I was unable to decipher the voice at the end of the line. Your brother collapsed. Hesitant to respond, I chose first to grapple with my muted screams. Memories of childhood chaos came rushing back as I mustered the courage to ask, "Is he all right?" My body stiffened. Was it his heart? He was only 21, but having both parents die prematurely forced this possibility upon me. "He's at St Thomas's Hospital," was all she said before the phone went dead. There was an awkwardness in her voice. She knew more. I trembled at the hospital reception and picked at the edges of my nails in nervousness. I was trying hard to resist the temptation to bite them. My eyes misted over. The tears forming in the crevices were fighting their way out. My determination to keep them hidden meant that I needed to avoid the scrutiny of people. Not easy in a bustling hospital. I was directed to floor 5 and hurried along. A ward meant David was alive. Moments later, arriving at a desk, I looked up to see his name written on one of those wipe-away boards in red ink. I didn't wait to ask anyone. David and I had been looking after ourselves for long enough, and I was familiar with figuring things out for myself. Besides, asking for help was an unnecessary distraction. Quickening my pace to avoid questioning from hospital staff, I repeated the bed number 7 in my head. As I approached the row of cubicles, I looked around, impetuously trying to avoid contact with anyone who was not David. I didn't need to walk around to see that he was not there. The faces were a cloud of white. Then I noticed it, the only area with the curtains drawn shut. I walked towards them, all the while watching my Converses as they squeaked against the gloss of the floor. I didn't want David to be my next dead body. Outside bed 7, a doctor stood adjacent to the curtains. Feigning confidence, I announced, "I'm David's sister," then quickly interjected with, "and his next of kin." I looked younger than my 23 years and was bored of being asked if I was over 18 or where our parents were. I was accustomed to the astonished responses to my guardianship of David ever since enrolling him in secondary school when I was 16. The doctor guided me to the corner of the ward as he whispered, "Your brother has taken an overdose." The word overdose was spoken so softly that I felt the need to lip read. I gasped and let out a vulgar shriek, which caused a group of men in white coats to stop and stare. "He's all right, we just need to flush the drugs out. We are also doing some tests to check he has not caused any damage." I looked away from the doctor's lips and up at his eyes. Damage? There was irritation in his voice, and I realised for the first time that he could barely look at me. "There's a chance that David has caused some irreparable harm by taking so many paracetamols. It could have long-lasting effects on his kidneys." I took a moment to read the name on the doctor's lanyard before looking back at the cubicle. I thought I should at least know the name of the person who'd saved my brother, but it was no use. As soon as I saw David's emaciated body, I had forgotten who the doctor was. Alone in the cordoned space, we stood, meters apart, locked on each other. David partially covered in a hospital gown, feet exposed, and tubes piercing into his veins as he mouthed, "I'm sorry, Bern." And I knew that he meant it. His body remained slumped, limbs motionless. He was the purest vision of dejection I was ever to see. His lower demeanour reflected shame, and despite the stifling environment, I was still absorbing the love he had. He did not want to hurt me. "Why?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "Was it the breakup, or because of Mummy?" He shrugged the possibilities away and was unable to articulate anymore. It was as though he barely understood what he had done. There were several nurses who gathered by David's bed. Despite their presence, I've never felt so alone. They didn't introduce themselves or ask how we were. They entered the cubicle in silence, tiptoeing as if they wished to disappear into the curtains. We tried to ignore the side glances, sometimes accompanied by an awkward explanation. We felt unable to speak freely and spent most of our time sat quietly. Whilst resisting the urge to tidy up, I listed comforting treats I could make for dinner, but David was, as usual, unenthusiastic about food. "I'll eat whatever you make, Bern." It felt odd discussing trivia, trying to go back to normal as if nothing had happened, but I did not know what else to do. Fluids streamed through him. The intravenous bags were changed every hour, so I sheepishly asked a nurse, "How much more does he need before the drugs are out of his system?" I was met with an optimistic response. "Not long now," but embarrassment heaved through her tone, and I translated anger from her weighty sighs. As one nurse informed me, "He is fit and well. He is deliberately making himself sick and wasting our time when we have real patients who need our help." Having held it together, I could feel the tears swell out of me then. After spending an afternoon in the cubicle, we were told we could leave. "You were very lucky indeed," the doctor informed us. And although we understood what he meant, we didn't feel it. David shot me his "what a dick" look, and I gave a knowing nod back in agreement. Orphaned and abandoned are not words we associated with such prosperity. We walked side by side, our heads hung low, because the guilt plagued our minds. Neither of us knew anything of this alternate life we had now entered. Heavy loads of remorse followed our steps home. David would never say what led him to the attempt I believed to be his first, and I couldn't see David's illness, his mind so full of agony. We left the hospital with nothing, no advice or psychiatric assessment. All we had was the blessing that David was alive, and that, as we were told, no damage had been done, although arguably the term damage was being used very loosely. That's the end of that section.